So we're going to move now. We're going to switch industries, and we're going to go from energy over to the life sciences sector. So do we have Michael and Bob?
Yeah, I'm online. This is Michael Batie. I'm still waiting for the host to allow me to turn my video on.
Same here.
All right, looks like you're about ready to appear. There we go. Got
Almost.
We got Bob. Now we're waiting on
Hello.
Michael.
Yeah,
Something going on with Michael there.
there we
Okay.
go.
Hey, we got it. Okay. Well, talk about a different industry. Life science companies have some really unique challenges in moving from research through drug trials, finally through production facilities, validation, and then finally getting therapies to market. And today we're really pleased to have two folks who are really in much different kind of positions in this whole value chain, Bob and Michael. So let me introduce them, and then we're going to turn over. We're going to have a really interesting discussion. So Michael Batie is the Director of Project Management at Genentech's Vacaville biopharmaceutical production site, one of the largest bulk monoclonal antibiotic production plants on the planet. He leads the project delivery team executing commercial technology transfers, capital investments, and lifecycle projects. Prior to joining Genentech, he was a project director at Lawrence Berkeley's National Laboratory on the Integrative Genomics Building Project. Michael's previous experience includes 15 years at Bayer Pharmaceuticals with increasing levels of responsibility from senior project manager to director of plant engineering. So welcome, Michael. The second is Bob Snyder, CEO of Binsky Snyder. As a fourth generation owner, Bob has worked and been involved in mechanical contracting industry since his youth. This guy knows how to weld. Bob's experience spans all aspects of business, including sales, estimating, project controls, management, engineering, drafting, purchasing, IT, and financial management. He's been around the block. Bob has a strong technical and design aptitude, and really has a vast understanding of both conceptual and technical aspects of mechanical systems. He really brings a unique voice to this conversation, as his company are the people that do the real mechanical work on life science projects. So let's start with Michael and get the ball rolling. So Michael, most of our audience are probably not familiar with life sciences and the challenges that you face. What's involved in a company like Genentech bringing a product from research all the way through? Why is timing important?
Yeah, thanks. I think just a little bit more background in the capital project side in the pharma world. You can break it down into a couple different areas. A greenfield or a brownfield, right? New buildings, new plants, which is not my area. There's another area which is expansion, retrofit, asset lifecycle management, and tech transfers in existing GMP manufacturing buildings. That's my area of expertise, is really bringing projects and value into an operational facility. So that the capital process for new products comes a bit later in the development stage. Once a product has gone through, we call phase 1, phase 2, the safety aspects of evaluating a molecule, then the business starts trying to evaluate what are the risks to manufacture. And this is where the capital aspect segregates itself from the molecule portion of the project. Business is trying to do a couple things. One, manage risk first and foremost. And if you have a new molecule, how do you bring it to market? Couple very basic options. One, you can manufacture it internally, or you can manufacture it externally. Externally, there's some really well-known companies out there that are in what we call the CMO or CDMO world, contract manufacturing. That route has some risks associated. First of all, you have to pay a significant amount of money to essentially block out plant utilization time, and you're locked into your contract, right? You're essentially buying factory time at a premium. So that comes as an opportunity cost if your molecule doesn't work. The other option is really the other option in the make or buy decision is internal manufacturing, which comes in two different flavors, if you will, right? Build a new facility or modify an existing facility. And this is where my world starts. If you're looking to do a greenfield, right, that could all starts with a business decision, but goes from site selection, all the way through building licensure. And that could be a 5-year process. And it includes all the risks associated with a new building, but also the permit process, and then ultimately licensure with the FDA. And if you're a global organization, you have to go through the other couple dozen regulatory authorities in the world for pre-approval inspections. And by the way, it's different for most countries or different regions. So last comes down to where my world intersects with new products. And this is modification of an existing facility. Offers some really key benefits. You have a trained workforce that knows how to manufacture the product. You have a licensed plant. And with a licensed plant, as a manufacturer, always looking to increase your plant utilization. If your plant's running 60-70% of the time, you're underutilized. If you bring in a new product, you get to, a theoretical 90% value, you're bringing incredible value to your business. However, the risk is you have to take the plant down to do a tech transfer. So this is where it's not just a capital project where we're putting up steel, stainless tubing and wire. This is taking down an operational facility, putting a new product and all the associated hardware and software modifications into the plant, returning that plant to service with all the modifications ready to use at the end of your shutdown, not only for your new product, but for all the other existing products within the plant. So that window becomes the most important part of this project and the most risk. Not essentially, but it is a fact. We have to come out of that shutdown with 100% certainty that we can return to service. So I think hopefully that answers your question at a high level, how capital projects get started in bringing a molecule.
Yeah, yes and no. That was very insightful, but I'd also like to understand kind of the timeline from when you think you got a good molecule to you've got it into the market. Is that overall timeline important? Is it something you desire to have to be as small as possible, or just that overall picture at 10,000 feet? Is time important?
Yeah, of course. I think back in my construction days, I'm pretty sure every contract starts with the words, time is of the essence. And that hasn't changed in any sense in the business world. And most importantly in this business as well, the generally accepted numbers are 10 years and $100 million to bring a product to market.
Oh, so 10 years from idea to market. 10
Correct.
years.
10 years. So it's generally accepted. That number can vary, but that's a generally accepted number, and the price is only going up, right? So where does that happen with capital projects? And this is that timeline of launch, right? So differentiate between long-term manufacturing and launch. Mm-hmm. Launching a product may be a year's worth of product to see how well it's going to sell and actually determine what kind of manufacturing you're going to need. So in some cases, organizations will launch at one site and then do long-term manufacturing at another site, or they'll CMO out to the to answer your question directly. When the decision's made to do a capital investment with the operating company, time is of the essence. Yeah. Having said that, the timing becomes critical in an operational plant, mostly around plant availability. So not certain how many folks keep up with biotech news, but the company I work for had a product called, we call it Gant, but the full molecule is gantenerumab. It's an Alzheimer's product. And this particular product had gone through drug discovery, clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, and we were in a clinical trial, a large multinational clinical trial that ultimately resulted in a failure for the molecule.
Mhm.
At this point, though, the molecule had been in development or research and development for some 7 years or so. And at this point, we'd reached this stage where after phase 2 trials had been completed, we had enough of an indication to believe that this molecule would be successful. Business decided to make the investment, and that investment's at the plant where I work. So we were actually in the middle of construction for the tech transfer. We're bringing in chromatography columns, skid columns, and beginning software recipe integration with our existing automation MES and distributed control system. When the news for the molecule failure was announced, we stopped tens of millions of dollars worth of construction in a 3-day period of time. So we went a 180-degree pivot from in the middle of a plant shutdown, right? Our plant's not operational currently. We're doing a tech transfer to a complete stop. So that's the risk to the business is you've invested 7 or 8 years of researchers' time, capital investment, research dollars from the business, and this study, it's called the graduate study for those that are interested. When that result, because the news is so big to the industry and to the company, it's announced publicly, right? Because it will affect the equity valuation of your business.
Sure.
So it was announced publicly, and we received the same news as the market received it, or the same day at our site. And ultimately, as long as it takes to wind up a capital project, it's amazing how quickly one can be stopped.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I think hopefully that answered the question.
Oh, that answers the question really well and teases out the risks and the challenges. Your life has been interesting since that announcement, I'm sure. So let's move over to Bob. So Bob, you're on the receiving end of all of this. You're right in the guts of the mechanical systems that it takes to make these bring these new products to life. What do you see? What are your observations? What do you see going on? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities to reduce waste? So what's on your mind?
Well, I think, and thank you, Gary. Listening to Michael talk about the entire product pipeline is interesting because we do firmly sit in the middle. We're kind of in this middle of now it's time to build a building. How do we get to market quick? The science even is changing as you're building these buildings. And things like, stuff happens, so to speak, where a drug fails, right? So this idea of variability, and I think that's, I'm going to talk a little bit and try to bring in these, kind of PPM concepts and factory physics and operations science, but this idea of variability across the entire life cycle of bringing a product to market there's a lot of risk associated with that. So, the key to all of that is how do you create a transparency across that entire life cycle? The other thing that's interesting about the kind of bringing a product to market is it tends to be very gated. And what I mean by gated, even to the extent that we build the entire building pretty much finished, we hand it over to Genentech and we say, we're done, you got it, we're substantially complete, all this stuff. And all of a sudden now they got to start it up. The first thing that usually happens is the scientists come in and we start tearing pipe apart, okay? Because it doesn't match. And the reality is the entire project is in WIP. The whole investment is sitting there in WIP waiting for the validation process to complete where they can make a product. And that's, it could be years. So I think the lesson to be learned is actually understanding all of these gated operational processes at a very high level, obviously then drilling them down to a lower level, but understanding how do we actually manage that WIP across the entire project. When we build a project, we're not building like the heating system or the boilers or the process systems, we're building them all. We're building the full capacity of that plant, when that full capacity may not actually be used for 5 years. Even in the initial startup phases of your project, you may take 5 years before you actually get to full capacity, you know, because you're doing 10 and 20 and 30%. So the lesson here, I think, is there is zero connection and transparency between what I'm doing day to day, what the engineers are doing day to day, and to the manufacturing aspects and the validation aspects. And I think what you want to do is start to think of in terms of operational science, and start really applying methodologies like concurrent engineering. Arguably, in the kind of this manufacturing industrialized construction world, we talk a lot about how do we advise product design with process design. And process design for us typically is, you know, making things in your fabrication shop, right? Or the installation process. And we take those two pieces of the puzzle and we bring that up into the engineering phase and create, we call them production packages, but you're actually doing true production engineering, process and product design together, so that you can create this, you know, this ultimate product. In the world of pharmaceutical, the validation aspects are so critical. You really need to be advising your product design with that in mind as well. So you need to actually have your engineering being done in a way that is talking about, well, how do we want this system isolated? How are we actually going to bring this part of the system and get it validated? We have very little conversation about any of those things. And the batching associated with each of the parts of the puzzle are completely different. You know, they may want to bring things online in a, you know, in a manufacturing cell way, where we're actually bringing them in a system way. There's a complete misalignment. So I think this idea of studying that and actually laying it all out using operations science and actually understanding the WIP associated with all of that is a really big deal. And I think that's really a lot of your opportunity sits with how do you apply those principles and make that completely transparent across all of the stakeholders in the process.
Yeah. So you usually show up pretty late in the game is what I'm hearing, way after the design's been done, way after the concept's been selected. And then you're handed a mechanical package, give me a price, and your job is to just go build it and say, and finish it. And what you're saying is if you were involved up front with the design, with the people that do validation, far better performance could be achieved in terms of time for sure, and probably in terms of rework and taking things apart and putting them back together and all the stuff that happens during validation. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that you can, if you think about the amount of cash required to put a facility in play, and then you have to wait 3 or 4 years before you put any of that cash to work, you should be thinking about, do we need to build the entire facility day one? Do we need the giant boilers that we're not going to need for 4 or 5 years down the road? We only need half that size. Instead of putting one big boiler in, maybe we should consider having smaller boilers. You wouldn't necessarily make that decision if you didn't understand the way in which the validation process occurs and how that downstream stuff. And the decision still might be the same to build the whole thing, but it should be at least analyzed and in a way that takes all that into account. And I think it really needs to look at from the lens of an operations science.
Well, it definitely would impact turn down ratios on equipment and all those kinds of things if you thought all the way through that. That is really, really insightful. So Michael, how do you have any thoughts on reaction to Bob's perspective here?
Yeah, actually quite a few. This is a world that I live in daily.
Yeah.
And I think one of, in a long-term operational plant, on the, I want to say on the procurement or contracting side, we've engaged in a more of a partnership approach, if you will, a different type of contract with our general contractor, our key mechanical trade contractor, as well as our electrical. So kind of a trifecta, if you will. The way we've modified our business is we'll come up with an internal conceptual design from our own internal process engineers.
Mhm.
If it's a permit package, we'll bring in an external consulting firm, typically to get us through the permitting phase and what we call basic design. If it is just a plant modification, bringing in a new buffer tank or new chromatography column, where it's not necessarily a permittable project, we'll do an internal concept design, essentially PFDs and PNIDs, for our trade contractor. And that at that point, once we come up with internal design, that's where we bring our trade contractor in. So our trade contractor not only evaluates the PNIDs, but they will generate, old school world orthographics, new school world, right? They'll model our bioreactor and come up with installation, 3D modeling, as well as fabrication drawings. They're an integral part of how we deliver projects. So once that project gets funded, our two key trade contractors, right? And electrical is really an umbrella for, high voltage, low voltage, but also data cabling and instrumentation, which is a significant part of our operation. And then mechanical trade contractor as well, right? For installation of not only process pipe, process tube, drains, but all the HVAC modifications. So we've taken, just to summarize, more of an integrated project approach to how we deliver. And then on the back end, if you will, it's something. There's different terms. I've heard operational integration. I've heard transition operations. What we've done to turn a construction project into an operational facility is our same internal process engineers that came up with the concept design. They're also responsible to do the qualification. So they're the same folks that came up with the PNIDs are the same folks that are out in the field verifying what the contractor installed. They're also the same people that approve the shop drawings for the installation, right? So it's the same people, the same team that's responsible for the design, the installation, and the qualification. Again, kind of making a narrow pool to facilitate a better integration. The other part that we found most effective is the actual operational segment. So most of our engineers, take no offense, engineers out there on the call, maybe not the right people to operate bioreactors necessarily. We've got some trained technicians. We actually bring them in to operate the equipment to operational ranges, design ranges, or qualification ranges, so that our engineers can do the verification to ensure the equipment meets the design or the qualification requirements. So we bring our manufacturing folks in from the very time pressure tests are completed by their trade contractor, and they turn over a system that's full of argon or nitrogen being purged, and we'll stop the purge, fill it up with water. Our manufacturing operations takes it that early in the ownership process. So more of an much more integrated process than the traditional contract starts here, ends here, then the next team comes in. They have to figure out what the previous team did and do that transfer of knowledge. And so that becomes the experience has shown that it becomes a very segmented process. And that effort takes an incredible amount of time, right, for each contractual relationship to transfer to the next.
And it sounds like you and Bob are very much on the same page, driving
and
similar things there.
Yes, I totally agree.
And we got a couple of questions. We're
Sure.
getting pressed for time here, but I want to throw them out there real quick. One question, of the 10 years to bring a new product to market, how much is in queue time? Do we even know?
What I'm not sure
How much is in queue time on the 10 years to bring a product from a conception to product to market? How much is the big batch waiting during that whole process?
9 years.
Wow.
So we,
Wow.
right.
That
So,
sounds like a huge opportunity to me.
well, it's a little bit difficult because the successive phases, you start out with a molecule and you're trying to determine if it's safe and effective.
Sure.
Then you have to scale it up, and then you go through an iterative process to figure out how to manufacture this molecule. And while you're in clinical trials, you're still in development, trying to figure out how do we actually replicate this molecule in a production environment. And then once phase 3 ends and everybody says, yay, go, that's when your queue starts.
Yeah.
But
So
you're not,
any opinions on that queue time and what can be done about it? Point of view?
the thought ultimately comes down to the biological products have to be safe,
Sure.
effective, and proven.
Yeah.
And I think there's a great case with, it was a modified biological, but if you take a look at the mRNA vaccine that came out, and that came out in just about a year's time, but that was billions of dollars spent by the government, with everybody on the same page, along with FDA emergency authorization, which just doesn't happen very often.
Not the norm. Yeah.
Not the norm. So, that whole product life cycle got squeezed from years into 1 year.
Yeah. So Bob, what's your perspective on queue time?
Well, I think that the process is littered with queue time. You're always waiting. You're waiting for everything all the time. You're always waiting for something in this process.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, how did they bring the mRNA vaccine to market? They threw a lot of money at it. That was their way of buffering time, right? And I think that's the interesting part of all of the conversations we have, is if you start to think of it in terms or through the lens of operation science, you can start, maybe it takes more than 1 year, but maybe it could be 5 years. And maybe you don't have to push out as much cash as required over that 5-year period if you understand truly, LRM, last responsible moment, and you're truly making this whole thing transparent and looking at it from a production lens. This is a production system, right? They're all production systems. The question is, are you making them transparent and actually pulling the 5 levers the right way to create the outcomes you want? So yeah, it all just makes so much sense. I think it just requires more people thinking in terms of the work. Mm-hmm. And what the work really is, whether it be, just, figuring out what the molecule should be, whether it be, how do you upscale it, from a pilot plant up to a manufacturing, whether it's, how should we design these facilities? That's all the work that occurs, including, and then you have the physical work attached to that. If we actually focus on that and actually really process map it out, and really start looking at, last responsible moment and WIP and that stuff, I think there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity to bring these things to market at significantly less cash requirement. I think that's the end result, right? Mm-hmm.
So we're unfortunately, guys, we're at time here. We have some other questions. We're going to get them to our panelists here so they can perhaps answer them directly with the folks that ask, because we don't want to ignore any of the questions. Before we go, though, Bob, you've got a lot of passion for this. Hopefully, if you're in the life science world, we've piqued your interest a little bit on the challenges and potential solutions or things to make it better. We mentioned earlier, we're launching a life sciences working group. And Bob, you want to give that a small pitch here?
Yeah, I think I think there's just such a lack of understanding across the entire process, that we just need a lot of people in the game to try to figure out and, learn about production management, but then really expose all of the pitfalls and all the challenges, and really start to map out, this life cycle of, how do you bring a drug to market, and start to work on that together. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to make a big difference.
Okay, so if you've got an interest in participating in a working group for life sciences, drop me a note and we'll get you connected up with these guys. So thank you both for your generous contribution of your time and your insight and your experience and your war wounds. Very much appreciated. So thanks again, guys.